Hello and welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley, your host and guide for the next 2 hours on this lazy Sunday afternoon, where many of us have been awed by the aurora borealis streaking across our late spring skies, showing us the beauty and the power of nature, within which we are mere specks. Today, we are looking at the power of purpose, that driving force that gives us meaning, direction, and a sense of fulfillment. It's medically proven that when we align our actions with a deeper purpose, we can unlock a spring of energy that can propel us towards a more meaningful life. From stamp collecting to sailing the Pacific to gardening the allotment, it doesn't matter. Done right, each of us gets an individual sense of well-being. I have 3 guests: the rugged and romantic Rosie Stancer, a cousin of the late Queen Elizabeth, and she could have measured her life in coffee spoons and garden parties, but she chose instead to walk to the North Pole. Why? We'll find out. Say hello to us, Rosie.
Hello, everyone.
It's great to see you. We'll be talking to you very soon because you are first up on the guest list. And then after that, we have the hearty and handsome Harry Bucknell, soldier, best-selling travel writer. How does walking hours on end giving purpose? Do we all have a Forrest Gump inside us? Harry, say hello.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Lovely to see you. And you forgot to mention Rosie's Fortnum Mason pate, which she took with her across the Antarctic.
Pate to the
wine.
The wine.
And last up, we're going to have David Mark, who many of us know and love. What is that link between purpose and writing? David is going to set a specific creating writing path. David, tell us what it is.
It's a very simple one this time around, but I want you to be thinking with all of your senses as ever. Just tell us about this show. Tell us what it means to you. Tell us how it affects you. Tell me the thoughts that flow through you as you're listening to our inspirational guests. Just have that. Have the butterfly net in your head ready to catch ideas as they go past, and let's try and get them down on the page.
Oh, thank you so much for that, David. A butterfly net. I've got that in the Arctic and the cathedrals to which you walk, Harry. Now, Ben Summers, who many of you will also know and love, our behind-the-scenes technical wizard, is alas off sick today, and we wish him a very speedy recovery. In his place, brimming with talent, wisdom, and purpose, steps our very own Andy Yao, the star of Goldster Tai Chi, happy and courageous to expand his talents to keep the show on the road. Thank you for being here, Andy. Now, this is going to be a relaxed discussion, not like my Inside Story and magazine shows. If you want to join in, put it in the chat or raise a yellow hand. Andy will give you to us, pitch in, and we'll have a discussion. I'm going to talk a little bit to each of my 3 guests, find out what makes them tick, and then I'm going to guide that conversation for them to tell us how they cope, how they train, how they prepare, how they hunt down their purpose. And first up again, welcome Rosie Stancer. Give us your definition of purpose, Rosie.
Oh, hello, everyone. Well, purpose can propel you through all your challenges and obstacles in life. And my own purpose has been predominantly, other than actually also wearing the other hat of being a presenter for Goldster's magazine, I am an explorer.
Is that you behind you? But behind you, is that you that we're seeing?
That is actually me looking, I feel, a little bit like Christopher Robin, peering out into the freezing murk of the Arctic, because I tend to go to the extremities of the world, North Pole, South Pole, but also hot deserts as well, because it's in the extreme environments that you tend to get the magnified measurements of climate change.
Now, I want to take you through a little bit of how you or why you're doing what you're doing, because many of us, I think you must have done, Rosie, and I've done, you know, you wake up in the morning and say, oh, do I really need to get out of bed and go and pay this gas bill or go and change this things? So when, do you ever get that feeling, or do you always wake up with a huge list of things that you need to get done or you want to get done?
I think I wake up with an endless list of things that I really feel compelled to get done. If it's all going to take me a step closer to my end goal,
Yes, I
and
am.
it makes it much easier.
Yes, that's it. And whilst I was looking at what I was going to be talking to you about for these few minutes, I came across a fascinating podcast called the Tough Girl Podcast. And
Yes.
in there, I thought, I don't need to ask any questions. It's all here. So I'm going to put to you what's right. So being brought up by nannies and going to a prep boarding school at 7 in Scotland, is that what your childhood was?
Was largely about that, actually, which I suppose to a degree did actually inure me, certainly to some hardships that were involved in a prep boarding school up in the Highlands of Scotland. But it also taught me an awful lot about the values of teammanship. And I think it also inured me to some of the Scottish elements, to be honest. But being resourceful. Suddenly I was on my own. I didn't have my parents. I didn't have my terrifying nannies to cuss at me and answer every question. I had to find out for myself. And I think maybe this began sort of sowing some seeds of curiosity and adventure.
And then in that situation as a 7-year-old, it's also a matter of surviving within that team, isn't it? Finding your place, finding your friends, finding who supports you. Is survival a big element of purpose?
Yes, it definitely is. And it's about finding your role in life and daring to try out what is unknown to you. I mean, exploration, I've always thought, is it's not just geographical. It is actually psychological and spiritual, actually, as well, because you're exploring not just points on a map or parts on the globe, but you're actually exploring beyond your normal boundaries that other people probably peg out for you as well as yourself, and finding out actually the extent of your potential.
And does purpose then have to take you outside your normal boundaries, have to take you outside of your comfort zone?
I think you have to be prepared to go there. I think if you believe sufficiently in what you're trying to achieve, your end purpose, then that kind of equips you to be able to do that. You've got to get out of your comfort zone, up off the sofa and over the crevasse of unknown. And maybe your end purpose might seem rather daunting, audacious, bonkers even, but the moment you make that first step in your journey towards achieving it over that crevasse of unknown, well, you're already on your own. You're on your way. Your journey has begun, and with each step by way of preparations you take, that end goal draws closer and becomes more feasible.
That's fascinating. I'm going to actually skip because you've triggered something back to something that David Mark, actually, who's coming on much later, talks about in his in his writing, and I think it reflects a lot on this purpose. In what he has a detective, Sergeant McAvoy, but he talks about defeatist and jaded police officers, competent and incompetent investigators, inertia of a justice system, and sheer raw grief. It's the defeatist and jaded that touch me, because we all have friends that give up on things, or people that aren't reaching their potential. How do you talk to them?
I think you've got to make them understand that if they're jaded or giving up because it seems that their end goal, their purpose has shifted out of reach, and they and perhaps other people have put it upon them that they have, sorry to make this corny gesture, but failed. Well, I'm not a great believer even in that word, because you've got to kind of almost objectify it, look out on it yourself and see that actually there's probably a greater purpose, and that the experience that you've gone through by not meeting that particular goal has taught you an awful lot, and you've got to recalibrate and readjust and go in a slightly different direction to fulfill an ambition, it might yield different fruit. But I mean, if I could illustrate it by, say, a polar illustration that did Ernest Shackleton, the great Shackleton, the boss, ever reach a pole? No, he failed twice, actually, and died on his third voyage down to Antarctica. Did Scott realize his ambition of reaching the South Pole first? No, he didn't. And he and his immediate team died in the attempt. Did, say, a more contemporary illustration, the wonderful Henry Worsley complete his polar triumvirate? No, he didn't. But every single one of those men have proven to us to be icons of inspiration, with their valor, their nobility, and, you know, illustrating that it was about their journeys, not their destinations. And that's a metaphor for life, and whatever it is that you're trying to achieve.
Yes. And then, so when we talk about purpose, then we should also chase failure, also not be afraid of failing, and not being afraid of facing our friends and peers and say, I failed.
Dare to chance it. I mean, after, say, I prepare for 2 years before, in this instance, a polar expedition, and after all the assiduous logistical planning, after all the sometimes brutal training, you know, by the time of departure, I should be feeling like Superwoman and up for the job. But every night before departure is sleepless. It's a nightmare, because I'm suffused in fear. And what is the fear? It's not of the perils ahead. It's not of the hardships. It's not even of the possibility that it's a one-way ticket. It's actually fear that I'm going to make a fool of myself. Maybe I'll let go of my tent in the wind, or set it on fire with a stove. But basically, it's fear of failure.
The fear of failure. And can I just take you back to your prep boarding school, perhaps, or a little bit on from there? Because at what stage did you dream of having your first big expedition to one of the poles? That wasn't in your mind as a child, was it?
No, it wasn't in my mind at all. I mean, I suppose I was a bit of a tomboy. I liked climbing trees and riding out of bounds after lights out, and all that sort of normal mischief that one gets up to. But after that, I went into the fluffy, luxurious world of much later of public relations, having also been a debutante, although I did get crossed off the list.
A debutante?
Yes,
so you were presented to court. Were you? I thought they didn't exist.
No,
anymore.
Humphrey, I'm not that old. It had just got past that stage. Just.
That's where you're presented, so that you can find an eligible husband. Is that right?
Yes.
And that was your purpose when you did that, was it?
I think by that time it was more about the mothers regenerating their social lives after being stuck in the country, bringing up brats like myself.
No, but in you know, so you're presented to court, aren't you, as you're a debutante? Were you terrified of making a fool of yourself then, or had you trained and prepared for each step you would take and conversation you would have?
That's a very good question, because on reflection, no, I was not frightened of failing on the debutante circuit, because I didn't care.
Oh, tell us more about it. Yes, this is interesting. And did you care when you were public relations? Did you, at what stage, when it came to you identifying purpose, did you care and not care?
Yes, I think I did. I was conscientious and worked hard when I got into the world of public relations, but that was because I was very loyal to the people I was working with. And I think that was a sense of teammanship, not to let the side down.
Okay. So, and the application, I mean, in the mid-1990s, you applied for the first all-women expedition to the poles.
Correct.
Why did you choose that as your purpose, as opposed to, as I said in the intro, sailing the Atlantic or gardening the allotment?
Because it was a chance to leave a footprint in polar history. No women had been up to those polar regions. And it was largely dominated by big, muscly men with beards. It was a testosterone zone. And I just, having always been competitive with an older brother, I thought this was a wonderful chance to have a go myself. Thank you very much. And I thought, well, why can't women do it? Because I had this inherent suspicion that you didn't need to have those bulging biceps. You didn't need to have brawn. You needed to have strength of head and heart. Mm-hmm. And that's really that really excited me, the chance to explore our potential as women, and also, I admit, in those days, a little bit of glory seeking as well. I mean, women hadn't been up to the polar regions or down to the polar regions because it was largely dominated and controlled by the Navy.
So I just want to ask you one more question before I ask you another one about your peers, but why the poles? You know, so women hadn't, but there are lots of things that women are banned from doing, and they don't get paid less and all the rest of it. Why did you pick that as the one to go for?
Poles, I think because they were largely then untrodden. I mean, there were people pulling sledges all over the place on Antarctica now, claiming all sorts of nebulous claims, you know.
But back then,
that's me. Shortest, that's me. Fattest, this, that, the other, and all the rest. And it's all got a bit daft, really. But back in those days, certainly women weren't going to the poles. Certainly not the Arctic, which was much more physically perilous. And so it was a combination of that chance to make history, I admit, nothing to do with the environment. The word wasn't really being generally bandied around then, but I was very keen to explore one's potential physically and psychologically as a woman.
And when you were back in the, what, 25, 30 years ago, you told your friends and family what you wanted to do. Did they support? Did they laugh at you? Did they say you're not up to it? What was the reaction?
Well, actually, a lot of support, other than by my mother. For the first one, anyway. And then she came to understand what she referred to as the tug. But also what I found was some of the more eminent male polar explorers, one or two of them, Ran Fiennes, for instance, was actually very supportive. So that all helped, because of course one does actually rather sit on the shoulders of giants.
So your message, and I want to go on in a minute in how you actually prepare for this, but your message to those who suddenly get up and want to do something that's outside of that comfort zone we thought that they could fail at, and the brother, the mother, the friends, the people in the pub say, you never do that, just stick to what you're doing now. What's your message to that?
Stick to your instinct.
And it's a very personal instinct, isn't it?
It is about instinct. And if it's loud and clear, follow it, explore it, start taking your first steps, and then that bonkers idea, that wild ambition will actually come into focus. I mean, you know, yes, initially when I sort of the idea germinates of going back to the North Pole or whatever it is, and you have to get up at 5 on a winter's morning to train, and outside it's snowing and it's bleak and it's dark and it's cold, and you think, I don't know, I should I be doing this? This is crazy. But once you get out and you start training and you start preparing, it's okay. You know you're on your way.
Rosie is now going to give us a masterclass on preparing to move out of your comfort zone. But while she's doing that, and even now, do you have an instinct? Do you have a purpose you want to go for? Have you done it? Do you want to do it? put it in the chat. If you want to, put up a hand and talk directly to Rosie, and she will answer, because this is Goldster and we always answer questions that are put to us. but Rosie, you applied for this first all expedition. You went through a year-long selection process. Take us step by step your mental and physical preparation for doing this first expedition.
Well, first of all, I was very passionate about joining this team, because it wasn't instigated by me, this expedition. It was another person. It was all women, 20 of us, each of us rank amateurs, but initially 300 nutters applied and we had to be winnowed. So the SAS helped with that rather brutally and distilled us down to 20. And interestingly, their selection process sort of really, I suppose, illustrates quite a lot, because they weren't looking for experience and know-how in even how to navigate, or, you know, whatever it was. They were looking for teammanship, and they were looking to see if you fell to the ground and bit the dust, were you going to lie there and sob, or were you going to get up, dust yourself down and get on going? And so by the time it was distilled down after 4 days and I think 4 hours sleep, there was 20 of us. And we made for a very, very mixed team, slice of life from all walks of life, all ages. But that's what makes for good team dynamics. And we actually relayed to the North Pole in teams of 4, because we were all working, we couldn't afford the time. And also we obviously couldn't afford the budget. So this helped raise the funds. We triumphed, you know, and everyone was amazed, and it got a lot of attention, media, press, etc. And 4 of us felt that was not enough, and we went on down to the South Pole.
The same 4 from that original taking, the same team. Yeah. And tell me when you were, let's go into 2 stages. You're setting out on it. It's very exciting. But midway there, perhaps when you're in that shot behind you that we're seeing as you sort of look out onto this stark world, tell us your sort of mental state, what's going through your mind, whether you think you can make it.
Well, initially when one arrives on the sea ice, I certainly was transported. It is so beautiful. This is something that a lot of, dare I say, I'm not a feminist, but a lot of the male polar explorers and expeditions fail to mention just how beautiful the Arctic and Antarctica, but especially the Arctic is. I mean, it's extraordinary, the shape and the color of the ice and the noises it makes. It's like God's own ice gallery. And then after the first 5 minutes, of course, you're freezing cold and you want to go home. But it was this great, it ignited in me a great passion and love of the ice, which I've never lost. And really, it was the desire to intensify this experience of being on the ice that pushed me into going solo.
So this was an intense emotional experience that you thought that you would get, and you did get, when you, at some stage, you were there looking at the Arctic, and you thought, my God, I'm glad I'm doing this.
The cold and the hazards all serve to strip away all the layers of crud, like sort of the social armor you wear for protection in what I call this reality. You're stripped bare. And because of that, you become very finely tuned and very intuitive and instinctive. Your life is distilled down to mere survival. And this is a very positive kind of stress as opposed to the corrosive, or I find corrosive stress that can get you in this reality over here.
Howard, that is fascinating. And when you reached the pole and you had actually technically and tick box achieved your purpose, did you think of victory, or did you wonder about all the things you got wrong on the way, or were you still afraid of failure? What happened then?
Well, I remember distinctly when I reached the South Pole solo, not only feeling deflated, but also, and I think that maybe this is a woman's thing, but I had what they call imposter syndrome, I think, because I felt, how did I get away with that? I felt I must have cheated somehow, which obviously I couldn't possibly have done. And it's strange. I just couldn't believe that I had actually done it. I'd got away with it. And obviously I felt deflated because my whole raison d'etre over the last 2 years had been suddenly kicked away, like a stool kicked away from beneath me. All the preparations, the training, living, sleeping, breathing it, and then doing it, gone, poof.
And there was a stage that you got frostbite. And,
yes, that was.
We know, and gangrene, and we know that can be life-threatening or limb-threatening. What went through your mind with that? Was it, why on earth aren't I holding that garden party back home, or just how do I fix this?
How do I wear my peep-toe sandals at the garden party again? No, my it sounds very dispassionate, but you're focused on survival as much as success. And it also sounds rather human as well. I felt faintly embarrassed because it started on day 3, and by day 5, which is pretty early on, my feet were gangrenous, and it was nothing I could really help because it was apparently it was minus 65. My thermometer gave up at minus 60, and nothing really is designed to survive in those temperatures. So faced with either getting an evacuation and explaining myself to sponsors about why I'd been evacuated within the first week, I didn't really fancy that, although I'm sure they'd have been very sympathetic. So I decided to take the option, which was to prevent the gangrene from spreading, obviously, because that would have been possibly terminal, and remove the offending piggies and continue, which I did for 84 days.
And goodness. And so there wasn't interest, this idea of, you didn't think you had failed by getting gangrene, or that you were useless or impostered or anything. You just fixed it and went on.
Yeah. It was a challenge. Yeah. I try to think of these things as challenges rather than obstacles.
Yeah. And just because we're running and we've got some questions, but I just want to say that I have seen on your social media or whatever crosses my desk of you doing some fantastic exercises of weightlifting and this sort of thing. Well, what do you do physically to prepare for these things?
Well, I was going to talk about preparations because, of course, these expeditions are just a series of challenges, which include the physical side. And I'm not built in the mold of your iconic explorer, particularly polar. 5'3", yeah. Quite lightweight. So obviously, despite the belief in the strength of the mind and heart, you need that as well to get you through the physical training. And with the physical training, that tends to reinforce your mental strength. And in particular, training with, and I know Harry, our other guest, is ex-military. I trained with the military, with the Goldster Military Correction Centre, I should call it, okay. Prison, in other words, behind the wire. And they were superb because they knew how to get into your mind. They were pretty quick to spot where your fears or weaknesses were and bang them out of you. So they build up your mental fortitude as well. And all the time training with them, they would be attacking you psychologically, shouting at you, yelling at you, setting you traps, etc., etc. It was as if you were being prepared to go into a war zone, which in a way you were. You were going into nature.
It was dangerous and about. We have some questions coming in, and if anybody wants to ask a direct question to Rosie, put up a yellow hand, and Andy will tell me about it, and everything will work, we hope. But we have some. There was a Norwegian lady who I believe was the first woman to climb Everest. Do you know her? A friend of yours, Rosie?
Oh, I think. Does that person mean a Norwegian lady who was the first woman to get to the South Pole?
I've got Everest here, but Suri, tell us if you're wrong. But this was Everest. If anybody knows that, or she's a pate wine drinking friend of yours,
well, I think that if they're referring to a sort of if there was a female icon of mine in the world of exploration, particular polar exploration, it would be this Norwegian woman called Liv Arnesen. And yes, I do know her. And I went over before 2 of my polar expeditions to talk with her and to learn from her. And in fact, in many ways, she inspired me also to go solo, because she wrote a book about her first polar expedition. She was, being the first woman to go to the South Pole, she just went off very quietly in that Norwegian way and got it done, and did it much faster than all the blokes who had done it before too. And then she wrote a book, and instead of writing the book about staggering, starving, conquering her way to the South Pole like they all were, she wrote this beautiful book about the journey being one of not just physicality, but psychological and spiritual as well, and captured the beauty of the ice.
The Suri filled us in on this. Thank you, Suri. Adventure Randi Skaug, the first Norwegian woman to reach the summit of Mount Everest and then tick off seven summits, climbing the highest mountain peak on each continent. Randi Skaug. That's so must be two different.
Norwegians are very good at this sort of stuff.
They are. We had Odd Harold Haug on one of the early shows.
Oh, yes.
Climb Mount Everest. Rebecca, I would like to be instrumental in others' well-being, be it of children or adults, of both. And I've made some headway with my books, but planning to reach a wider audience. So her purpose is to help people with their well-being. Any shared ground there, Rosie, or is that 2 different tracks of purpose?
No, I think it's very much the same. I think with your well-being, one of the keys to your well-being is actually doing what you're happiest doing. Pursue what you want to pursue, and enjoy it, as well as make it work for you and your lifestyle.
Yes.
And with it, everything else in the jigsaw puzzle falls into place. Life is too short not to.
I think that because each of us has something that we feel we want to do.
Yes.
And it could be polar exploring, or it could be tidying my scruffy desk in front of me, but it's still a sense of purpose, isn't it? Emma, wonderful Emma, question. She's got 2 questions. Have you ever been to a place where you were the first person to reach such a place? If so, what came to mind?
Well, I don't know about reaching. I mean, for instance, on the Arctic, the whole that is just a crust of ice which is shifting all the time. So you know, it's rather abstract. And South Pole, obviously, Liv got there before me. But yes, crossing the Aral Desert.
Yes.
Part 1 of my desert trilogy, as I grandly call it.
Yes.
Nobody had crossed that before. Really, rather because it had been a sea before. So
that's right. You'd have to cross it in a submarine before, wouldn't you?
Exactly. So, well, it lent currency to the purpose of what one was doing there, which was to gather environmental information on the impact of draining that sea and what was being done about it, and the efficacy of the
Yes.
measures being undertaken.
And whilst we're on that, you're now planning an expedition to Saudi Arabia. Just give us a few seconds on what you're doing, what you hope to do there, because that's not hot, is it?
It's hot
I mean,
and
that's not
hot.
cold. I mean, that's not.
It's cold and hot.
It's cold and hot. Yes.
And that's because one covers mountains and desert, because
Yes.
everyone thinks of Saudi as just desert. But I'm following the original incense route, not the tourist one, but the original incense route, which major junction is on the southern border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia, and goes more or less due north to the Jordanian border.
Okay.
So I will effectively, with my little team, be following a route that hasn't been trodden on for 2,000 to 3,000 in its entirety, 2,000 to 3,000
So
years.
that is an answer to Emma's question in a way. So I will call you there on your cell phone, Rosie, and ask you how you feel to be in this place that nobody has been for 2,000 years, and we'll do a gossip. Emma, another thing, do you think there are still places on Earth which have not been explored?
That's a really good question, because some people might say, isn't it a little bit self-important to call yourself, or impertinent, an explorer? Because with satellite imagery and all the gizmos, surely we know where every most remote part of our planet is. So what is there left to explore? My goodness, are we an extinct species? But actually, no. As an explorer, we have to evolve because the planet is evolving, and climate change literally offers up fresh ground, because environments are changing, communities are having to adapt, there are different species as a result, so that there's plenty of fresh ground out there.
I just got a couple of other ones. I'll ask them together. Jennifer says, when things are down, how do you pick yourself up and motivate yourself? And then Liz says, do you intend to follow extreme physical challenges into your 90s, but you're only 30 now, Rosie, so you've got many years to go? Or might you look for some alternative challenges, e.g. knitting quietly by the fireside?
Well, put it this way. I've never heard of the word retire, so I'm not hanging up my boots yet. But as I mentioned the word adapt and evolve earlier on, I think that one has to set oneself up to succeed, and to be responsible about it as well. I know I talked about audacious plans and not being frightened of it, but you have to be realistic as well. And what I wouldn't want to do would be to put other lives at risk by having to rescue one in the process of.
So to sort of go to Jennifer's thing is that if you realize that you might get to an age that you can't walk to the pole or can't walk across the Aral Sea, would you pick yourself up and motivate yourself by identifying a new purpose, and what might that be?
Yeah, I think I'd help other people do what I have done.
Oh, okay.
And I'd also still keep doing what I'm doing, but I would do it, I don't know, sitting down on a camel.
You could do it from a drone or something. There's a quick one here that Rebecca, I think that you said that you had imposter syndrome in your last job. Can you fill us in on that, Rebecca, as we tell us a little more? Perhaps we'll bring you in later on, because I think that's a very interesting thing. Yes. That you, having reached the North Pole, had imposter syndrome, thinking, how did you get away with it? And then, you can get a job without those sort of things and still get that same psychological feeling. But you and I are out of time, but we are now going to go. Harry Bucknell, are you with us? Will you say hello to Rosie? Because Harry's not with us, so we'll keep talking. I just get this. Harry, Rosie, and I think you've met, but do you two do the same sort of thing?
Well, we do, but sort of differently, really, because Rosie is much more accomplished than I am, and I tend not to put myself in such harm's way.
You have imposter syndrome, Harry.
I don't think so. No, I think more. I just take a lot of time over things, really, more than anything else. So my sort of premise really is to do these extremely long journeys, which take an awful long time, and then it takes an awful long time to write them up too, and then it takes about 5 or 6 years before the next one happens. But it keeps you on the go, as it were. It all ends up usually because it starts with a dream, and I think then you think that's a jolly good idea, and often the dream comes. There may have been a little bit of drink taken, and that helps the dream come the dream. Then you think that needs to be done, and then off you go and do it. That's how I really come about it.
So now I have to introduce you properly, because you've done wonderful full flow there. But Harry walks from you've walked from St. Paul's Cathedral or Canterbury Cathedral to the Vatican. You've walked all of it, and you've walked the length and breadth of Britain and what you're writing about at the moment. Rosie walks from pole to pole. But Rosie, do you there's a lot of similarity, or is there not similarity in this?
Well, there's a similarity, isn't there, Harry? And we don't do anything mechanical.
No, I never went to prison to be trained. That's the only thing I will say. Rosie was taken into the Colchester Nick, and so she's got form, which I haven't got. I also think that, and of course, typically being a soldier, having been a soldier, Rosie should be where I am, and I should be where Rosie is. But it doesn't seem to work that way around. There's something we could talk about there, I think, don't you? There's a lot of similarity in terms of I think our outlook and commonality of purpose.
So I just want to, Rebecca, if you're with us, I'd like to bring you in to talk to both Harry and Rosie. If you're not with us, it doesn't matter, about this getting imposter. Rebecca, are you able to unmute?
I am, but there's a lot of noise in the background.
That's right. Just tell us about the job that you had and how you got imposter syndrome there, and then I'm going to hand back to Rosie and Harry.
Yeah, I was aiming to be an assistant accountant, and I was working my way up for like 15 years before I actually got there. But when I read the requirements of the job before I went for the interview and everything, it just seemed completely outside of my capabilities, and I didn't even know what they were going on about. I was really not thinking, I'm not even sure what they're saying I have to do in the job. But I went for the interviews, and I got through the second interview, through the third interview, and then they gave me the position, and I just felt like I was there and pretending to know what I was doing. But they seemed to think I was doing a marvelous job and I fitted really well. But in my head, I was thinking, I'm pretending to know what I'm doing because I have no idea what.
Did you get the job?
And how did the job go?
Oh, brilliantly. I was fitting in really well, and they loved me there, and they loved me that much that when I left to have Cass, they said if I go back to work, they wanted me to come back there and nowhere else. So
Makes you think, unless you're the captain of a jumbo jet, that's the same for all of us, really, isn't it? It might be the same for a captain of a jumbo jet, actually.
There's an alarming thought, Harry. You said Harry said you didn't get it. So do you think, let's ask a man, shall we? Do you think this is us women who tend to suffer from imposter syndrome?
Can I answer that? The answer is no, because I was very interested in hearing about your imposter syndrome issues, Rosie, because so the whole thing is that if I say to people, I went to Rome, and they say, how did you get there? I said, well, I walked, and they say yes, and I do generally say, even to this day, it's quite a butch thing to do, and it's really not me, and the whole thing is that you actually got there and you set your mind to do it. But I still believe that it was someone else who actually did it, and I can't really believe that I really actually did walk all that way. It's quite
Rosie, do you think when you were at the poll, did you think somebody else did this?
No, I didn't think somebody else did it. I just thought that I somehow must have, a bit like your interview, I must have cheated somehow to have got there. How else could I have done it? And I think that what sometimes happens, or maybe in that case that one was going through a sort of a time tunnel of the different, I always think of different realities, the reality of these desolate areas, and then that distant reality of home.
Rebecca, do you, we're talking about very different things here of the job that you went for, but do you feel empathize with what you're hearing from Rosie and Harry?
Oh yeah, I totally do. Yeah, I felt exactly the same sort of thing, and it wasn't just in that position as well. There was another position I did where I worked for a university and I was doing research, and gathering it all together, and it was a really important job, and they just thought I was marvelous. And that's how I got that second job with the assistant accountant, was that they gave me such a marvelous marvelous reference. Sorry. Sorry. Marvelous. They gave me such they gave me such a marvelous they gave me such a marvelous reference.
You're going to introduce us, Rebecca.
Cassie, do you want to say hello? Come on, say hello. These are explorers. They've been to the South Coast.
Hello,
Hi. Hello.
Hi. Hi.
This is Cassie. She likes writing stories and making up stories. You can go downstairs for a lolly.
Does she have a dream? Because
Yes.
Harry was talking
Cassie,
about
she wants to be a hairdresser in Tenerife.
I wouldn't mind being a hairdresser in Tenerife.
Because it's
You
warmer
haven't
there.
got any hair, Harry. How can you
that's all right.
practice?
I'd be a good advert for my work.
She practices on me all the time, and she takes photos of every single attempt of what
Well,
she does.
I think it's very impressive that you've got this very clear dream set out already. And as Harry was saying, and I completely agree with you, that all great achievements begin with a dream.
Well, and we're going to move on to Harry now, but thank you, Rebecca. Thank you so much, Rosie. Stay with us if you can, but if you have to go and tend the garden for a bit, but come back at the end.
Thanks,
and pitch in if you want to. Thanks so much for that, Rebecca. Now, Harry, you had 12 years as a soldier. You did not end up in Colchester, Nick, like Rosie did. You then worked as a consultant in the oil and mining industry in the Middle East, and then you published a book in Dolphin's Wake in 2011, and you've done other books about your walking trips that you're going to tell us about. You've also produced theatre on the London stage. So my question to you, soldiering, business consulting, walking, writing, theatre production, which one gives you the best sense of purpose?
Well, I'm bound to say, I think writing, because it is the best. It is like the best wine drunk, really, for me. I think that it enables you to think and to go to places which you can't just say jump in a car or get on an airplane to go to, and it enables you to you can live within huge bounds in that sense. But to write, you have to have done something to back it up. So I would then qualify my saying about writing being that the adventure is what makes the writing. And then but then if you look in your life, there are plenty of other adventures that you can call on, that you can write about too. But it is the writing that gives you purpose. It is the writing that gives purpose to any form of the recording of any form of adventure or undertaking that's important to me.
Is it writing per se, or is it the actual telling of the story that you've experienced?
I think initially it is telling of the story that you've experienced, but as you get into the meat of a book, you begin to find your own voice. And I think that, and I've only written 4 books at the moment, but every time you write a book, it is like you're starting from brand new. It's like your first day back at school, and you're a new boy, and there's no guarantee anything you write is going to be good. So it is, firstly, you worry about, are you telling that story of the journey that you've done in an accurate or a way that is symptomatic of the journey you've done? Does it represent perhaps more than the detail? And then you get into the writing side of it, and that is once you're on a roll, you almost don't want it to stop. It is like a drug in that sense.
That's now we're touching on a number of themes that I want to expand. We've got in the imposter syndrome theme that's fascinating, and Liz has just said in the chat here that Peter Hall, I think he's the theatre producer, isn't he, also suffered from imposter syndrome. So and then we've got the concept of the dream, and then the preparation, and then where you are and how your mind is at the end. And let's touch all of those. Go to Peter Hall and these people with imposter syndrome. What is it, Harry, in your mind, imposter syndrome? Just describe it.
Well, I think it's very interesting that Rosie thought it was just peculiar to women in the Antarctic or the Arctic environment, because I think what it is that if I was Bear Grylls, or if I was I don't know, Ralph Fiennes or something like that, then you're an explorer. You're meant to be doing these things, but I didn't. I don't position myself. I don't set myself up to be the explorer. People have at times described me as an adventurer, and that I think is something which I wear. I don't wear that very well. I'm
How would
someone
you describe yourself?
I think as a writer.
And do you get imposter syndrome as a writer when a book comes out, which we're going to talk about in greater detail in a moment? Do you feel I couldn't, how did I do that? I'm faking it or something?
No, I don't. I mean, as a Harrovian, it is remarkable that I can write a book at all, frankly. But words not coming easily to me. But so I'm always quite sort of. I think one is a book is a birthing, and I think it is something that once it's finished and you're done with it, it's something you can be justly proud of. Unless, say, for example, you take someone like Laurie Lee's when I walked out one summer morning, and he didn't want to know any more about that script, and he said you can be done with it and do what you want with it. But I can understand if you're a real professional writer who really churns out the copy, then that can be the case. But in someone like me who writes a book every 4 or 5 years, it is much more of a labor of love, really. And you certainly don't write for the accolade. You don't write for the fame, because they don't write for the money. You write for the joy of it, and all the other stuff. If it comes, it comes. If the book is worthy of it, then it'll get it anyway. But you don't.
Just if I go back through that list, there's soldiering, business consulting, walking, writing, and play production, these things that you don't. And you mentioned very interestingly, you don't do it for the money. For some people, I suspect that money is a driving purpose, but for many, is it not? And that there's something underneath it?
I remember George Michael in an interview with Michael Parkinson, and he said, that if you do something for the love of it, and the money will come afterwards. And I think if you set out at my level to do it for the money, you're chasing wild dreams then, and it's not that you're doing it for the wrong reason. That you want to tell a story, and you want others to be able to enjoy that story. That's why you write, and the premise you're doing just for the money means you're not going to write well.
So your soldiering and business consulting, that was for what purpose did you do those two jobs?
Well, the business consulting was financially quite lucrative. I won't deny that.
That was for the money.
Yeah, to a degree,
but you enjoyed it, yes.
But I've never done anything that I didn't enjoy, and I didn't understand why you would. I mean, I do understand why people do things you don't enjoy. But on the whole, if you don't enjoy it for a long time, then it's time to do something else.
And the soldiering would have had a purpose to it?
Oh, absolutely. So the soldiering, I mean, don't get me wrong. You can't get many finer jobs than being a soldier in the British Army in the late 1980s and 1990s. It was a huge amount of fun. I was in a great regiment, and I'm very proud of that. And it was a great adventure. But also, as I viewed it, it wasn't a game plan of mine to end up being a writer, but it probably was. But it was what I call the manure on the rose. It's what gives you the authority where I can go out and say, I've seen that, I know about that, or I can comment on that, because I have a lens of experience which gives me that sort of depth and understanding of life in the world.
Thank you for that. I wanted to ground us so that our audience knows you and knows what makes you tick, which I think you've told us to. And I want you all to engage with Harry, ask questions, or put a hand up and talk to him, because now I want to talk about your writing your books, which are about your travel, really, and your travel is on foot, basically. So just tell us. I mean, the one I love when I talked to you earlier was arriving in the Vatican and then leaving from just explain that to us, how you came about doing that.
Well, the two books that are currently on the bookshelf or knocking around on Amazon are In the Dolphin's Wake, which is the story of my journey from Venice to Istanbul through the Greek islands. That was 5,500 miles. I think we took in about in the book, I think 26 islands, but I think it's about 41 in toto. And again, it's like all these things. I never set out to travel around all the islands in Greece, but it transpires that there are very few people indeed who've ever been able to do such a journey. That was just fortuitous at the time. And as a book to write, my inspiration being people like Gerald Durrell, Lawrence Durrell. It was a joy, an absolute joy of a journey, and I was a very lucky man to be able to do that.
And just the idea of walking has got a sense of, you mentioned Laurie Lee as I walked out one midsummer's morning. That was your idea of travel writing, was it? Is to walk?
Very much so. I think I said it when I was in the army. I had no idea I was going to be a writer. I think someone else said to me, all the indications were there. My favorite writers, people like Eric Newby, Laurie Lee, Jan Morris, Gerald Durrell, because there's wonderful sense of sort of chaos and humor.
Paul Thoreau, is he on your list?
Yes, but he's an exalted writer, and I'm not in his league, and quite learned in his style. My style is always much more brash, it's much more in your face, and there's always an element of calamity just around the corner, usually because I've left something behind or taken a wrong turn. My map reading's not very well, and what makes you laugh as a travel writer, people think you're an expert on travel. You're not really. You're an expert on causing chaos half the time, and then it's how you get out of that chaos, or how you tell the story of that chaos. Or alternatively, if you're walking from London to Rome, which I did for my second book, Like a Tramp, Like a Pilgrim, there are many days when not a lot happens, and it is for the reader extremely dull. So, but you then find things, and it is not the big thing, like say say Rouse Cathedral, but it is the small things like the angels of the door to Rouse Cathedral, or you come across some small chapel, or you meet some fellow pilgrim who has some particular idiosyncrasy, which is worthy of note. And that's what makes the story interesting. Because if you just do it as a slavish record of foot after foot after foot of slogging through the roads, it can get quite difficult.
That's the writing element, but inside your own mind, we heard from Rosie very graphically that there was a stage on her first expedition where she saw this beauty, vivid beauty of the Arctic spread out in front of her like nothing ever seen before. In your, one of your books, Tramp and Pilgrim, in your pilgrimages, let's say, have you come across a moment like that when you said, yes, this is why I was put on Earth, because I wanted to do this?
Yes. I think it's important to know that the reason why I went on this pilgrimage was because my house was struck by lightning, and I lost the entire copy of my first book, which I just completed. And so while I contemplated the problem of a black computer which had been connected to the internet to a poorly earthed house, I went downstairs to make a cup of coffee to contemplate my problem. And there on the front, on the Telegraph, was Malcolm Moore, who was a Rome correspondent, was writing about the Via Francigena, which was the new route, or a new route from London to Rome, which is being sponsored by Europe and Romano Prodi. And I thought, well, that's my next book. So 4 years on, suddenly you think, how did this book start? Well, my house was struck by a thunderbolt. And short of God coming in with a heavenly host into your sitting room, which was a bit tight at the time for a heavenly host to be received, you pretty much, it's quite clear that you were sent. I didn't want to go. I was sent anyway. But that aside, it is. So you go on these journeys because they're great things to do. Once the idea is in my head, usually that's how it stays there until it's sorted out.
And the idea is your driving purpose then, so it embeds, locks in, and you have to do it.
Yes, and there are always variations on things. So now that I'm coming to the end of my third book, which will come out in March, A Road for All Seasons, they're now working on what will be next, and that could be variation of anything from 3 to 5 ideas at any one time, and you never know what's going to win. And as I say, you're going back to the drawing board once again, and you're the new boy at school, and you've got to start all from the beginning. And I think that's a good thing, because I think if you get complacent about writing,
yes,
you then become sloppy, and it's never an easy. Writing is never an easy task. You've got to get out and do the work.
Rita's asking here, so when you commence on a walk, were you thinking writing as you're going along to keep you going, or are you putting the writing on the back burner and actually taking in the experiences?
No, I'm a bird of little brain, so I have to write as I go. But also sometimes that can hold up, that can impede your progress during the day, because if you have a thought, I have to record it pretty much there and then. And at the same time as that, sometimes the whole passage will go down. It'll say exactly as it is, as it was there and then, will give you the feeling of the day. I'd just like to go back, Humphrey, to this moment that you talk about with Rosie, this sort of a eureka moment, as it were.
Yeah.
And for me, it was arriving at the Cathedral at Lyon in France. And I climbed up this huge hill. Every cathedral in France seems to be built on a perpetuous mountain. And I climbed up to the top and I was shown around, and there was this enormous cathedral. What was incredible about it was all over it were carvings of foreign animals, rhinoceroses, there were lions, tigers, and these were all from the Middle Ages. And you thought, this is what pilgrimage is all about, because I'm seeing what the medieval pilgrim saw, and he was seeing wonderment in front of him, the Wembley Stadium of Bruges, and he must have been in awe about that. And then he goes back home and says, this is what I have seen. And that is the message of pilgrimage. It is carrying people's prayers and coming back and saying, this is how good it is. And you need
I mean, that's fascinating. So that was your eureka moment. So when you see that, do you get on the phone to friends, family, whatever, and tell them about them, or do you keep that to yourself?
In that case, well, then you couldn't really, because I wasn't so adept. I had a blog and I was doing it on Facebook, and you haven't really got time to really record that or let that be known, in the sense you've got so much else going on while you're on a journey. Another time, which I found particularly emotional, was when I finally got to the sea, having crossed the Apennine Mountains, and that was a day and a half. And the Apennine Mountains are short but unforgiving, very poignant little stubs of rock that stick out in the spine of Italy. And as you came over the crest, after an impossible day without any water or anything, suddenly this bough of a tree lifted, and I could see what looked like the sky between two mountains. And suddenly I realized it was the sea. And I was with a Swiss school teacher at the time, and he realized that this was, for me, quite a moment. I think I'd walked something like 78 days non-stop, and suddenly I got to the sea. I thought, crikey, I've got to the sea. And I had to stop for a bit. And there was a donkey who was with me at the time, and he kept putting his head over my shoulder. And me and the donkey sat, we just looked at the view, and I simply couldn't believe what I was looking at. And that was a very emotional time, because when I come all that way, I thought, bloody hell, you know.
Talk us through, you're setting out on a trip. It's going to take you weeks, months, but you're leaving your home on it. How long does it take you to get into that state of mind we heard from Rosie, that sort of cleansing of all the home life to the sort of life that you're doing there?
I think it takes about, from the moment you start, and that's the moment you actually physically leave, you begin on the journey proper. I think it takes about a week, 10 days to close down everything that's going on in your life elsewhere, such that you can then just become that journey, and that becomes your focus. And once you're on journey, as it were, you don't want to be thinking about anything else. And the interesting thing about my new book coming out, A Road for All Seasons, is that it was 4 journeys over 1 year, and so it being through Britain, you never quite were able to wholly disengage.
Yes,
that was the idea. That was the premise behind
it. Still got the 6 o'clock news and
yes,
the sun and that to deal with, haven't
absolutely.
you?
But throughout the journey, not only are you so in the build up to it, you've got what I call the mental build up, where you're reading and you're finding out, you're getting your sort of sense of how that will be. And just to show you, this rather irreverent document here was the planning map that I used for the current book. And I'm sorry about all the graffiti on it.
Going through Britain, isn't it? It's right the way through Britain, yeah.
So that shows you there how broad brush it was. And that then Stanford's, who were my sponsor, gave me all the maps, 60 maps that went with it. And you then get a sense of what you're really up to. But it looks very broad brush, and that is very broad brush. But that's where the detail comes. So you start big and think no. But in terms of so then there's physical preparation and mental. So you've got the reading up, you've got the sort of, so you know roughly what you're going to. and you don't want to be so briefed up that actually you then, you've got all the answers before you've got there. And then you have the physical preparation, which is anything from getting your kit together to actually physically getting ready to do the job. When I went to Rome, and I should have been extremely fit to do that, but I was quite fit anyway. And I look at my mother saying to me, "Darling, shouldn't you be doing some preparation for this?" And I said, "No, Ma, I was in the army, don't worry, I have to deal with this." And after about day 3, I remember I got down, I sat down for a thermos flask of tea or something outside Canterbury, and I went to stand up and I couldn't move. And then when I did, it felt like someone strapped 2 hot cannonballs behind the backs of my knees. And it was like that for about a week. And then you got your fitness back. And I think it's good to prepare. And then when I got to Rans, I threw out half of my kit again. You think you cut yourself right down to the bone. You get yourself you get yourself cut down.
Is the pack that you carry as big or smaller than what Rose is carrying there in her in the Arctic?
Much more. But also the weather was with me. So and you got very good at, you only carried about 2 sets of kit. One was for night, one was for day. By the time you got to the end of the day, the set of kit you were wearing was just it was falling off you. And you sing that straight in the wash, put the night stuff on, and then by the next day the stuff was ready to go. And you had your wet proofs and so 1 or 2 bits and bobs. You travel as light as you can. And people would say,
So I have to ask you one thing, because Rosie said when she got there she felt deflated. You told me, I think in earlier conversation, you got to the Vatican, and what happened?
Well, it is the case that it is the journey is better than the destination. Once you get there, can be a little deflating, and that was certainly my case. And it wasn't. I remember I was determined to make a grand entrance into the Vatican, as is my wont. But so there's Monte Mario beforehand, and we all congregated. There's 3 or 4 of us who have been sort of walking off and on together for a long time. There's lovely French balloonist and the German Pole, and there was Domingo, who was a Spanish journalist. And we sat on top of the hill. We looked down. And there was the Vatican ahead of us. And I said, "Right, I'm going off." And I had planned that you come in by the sort of up the Cumbre de Pall Mall, up Cumbre de Mall, going up to Buckingham Palace. There's this road. So anyway, so I shot down, I think, and but the route actually drives you in from the flank, and it's not, it's like going down the back streets of Soho. So I thought, I can't be. And every time I kept trying to get into this Mall thing, I was sort of always too high up. So eventually, I got it right at the beginning. And I stood in the middle of the road. I said, "Right, I'm going to march up this like going on trooping the colour." Anyway, I nearly got hit by about 6 buses on the way. So that any idea of romance about they'll be watching me, you can forget that. And then Domingo, I never forget, was almost in tears because he said, "All these people have come on buses, they've come on aeroplanes," he said, "and they're getting just the same reception as we are." And I said, "Yes, because they're pilgrims too." He said, "Doesn't matter how you got there; it's the fact that you went at all." And you think you've done something great, and you haven't really. That's the important thing, is you haven't done anything great. You've just shown your devotion to God. And the incredible thing is he sort of thought,
Sorry, in your case, I've got an interesting question from Sue. Your purpose has to be in tune with your core beliefs and values. When you reach your destination, your actual purpose is not reaching that destination; it's writing about it. Is that 2 different things that you've got there?
No, I understand what you're saying, but I didn't agree because I wouldn't have gone there in the first place had I not wanted to go there, and I wanted to write about it so that others would know about it, and about the journey, and about understanding what the journey is all about, and how it is, and how it hasn't changed since medieval times, so there's no duality of purpose in there. But the purpose behind the writing is to tell the story of the tale itself.
So both of them are equal, aren't they? Because you can't write unless you've done that.
No.
Harry, a couple of other questions before we. That has been absolutely fascinating. I'm just looking through. Rebecca, who was with us earlier, I agree. I didn't write and publish my book for money. I wrote because I love writing, and I published with the aim of helping others by sharing with them. there is this sharing element, isn't there, Harry, of it?
It is a great privilege to write, and I think that's how I view it. And you know, if I have a gift, then I'm very lucky in that sense.
Yes.
I also think so. So I always think, who is my audience? My audience is the man or woman who is on the tube and they're stuck in some tedious job, and they can read about what I've done and think, well, that's either something to go for, or it's something to enjoy while you're doing whatever you're doing.
Yes.
And that's who I write it for. I'm lucky enough to go and do these things. And so, not from my rich point of view, rich or whatever, but I just have that crazy gene that falls in my brain, makes you want to go and do these things.
Well, that crazy gene you talked about is what we're talking about. It's that thing that drives and motivates a purpose. Liz says a cycling friend and his wife are currently walking the Via Francigena, though not for such drastic reasons. You talk about crazy ideas. Liz talks about drastic reasons, but then they're not, are they? It's a purpose that everybody, as Rebecca has told us, you know, her purpose was to get the job, and then she felt she didn't deserve it. We've got Liz has a question. Did you keep a journal as you walk? If not, how did you remember all the detail? Not so much where you went, but my computer's going crazy. But you know what she's saying.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
so I live off notebooks, and for that journey there were 9 notebooks, and they become and I would send them all home each time, so then there's guarantee that you know I had the notes and so on. And then I also had a blog which I kept up, and Facebook, and I take hundreds of pictures, because where you haven't got time to write something down, then you've got a visual record. So if all the notebooks had got lost, I wouldn't have been wholly sunk.
And what is your balance between the detail of what you've just said, the photographs, and Liz is asking, and your feelings, how you felt about it? Are they both in there?
Yes, they are. When great events happen on these journeys, and they do remarkably. I mean, there can be an accident, like when I was in northern Greece, and I fell the side of a mountain. Or there was another time when very spiritual things happen, and you get very caught up in the whole thing. Yes. And sometimes the coincidences on the Via Francigena were the pilgrims, and suddenly something would happen. It became so great that actually you and it sounds bizarre, but you begin to believe in the power of angels and understand how angels exist, because angels suddenly appear, as it were, through people, and just when you need something to drink or it's interesting in that sense. So you do record sentiment, and you have to record that, because otherwise you might miss the moment. I just want to go back to the dream thing. When I was instructing at Sandhurst, someone left this little piece on my desk, and I've always kept it with me. And the last 2 lines are that life's battles don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or later the man who wins is the one who thinks he can. And I've always thought it's about your will and your mind. So you might say, I've always wanted to go to the Caribbean, but then if you don't do it, you know, then it's just a wish. And it's like writing a book. A book is only a book once it's published, and you've got to drive it through. Everything you do, you have to drive, and that's my sort of take on it. And if you say, I'm going to fly to the moon, then one day you will, if you're determined enough.
Well, that is a great note to end on, Harry, but don't go away, because I want to introduce you to Goldster's creative writing professor, David Mark. David, what did you think of what Harry just told us about writing?
That's fascinating. Nice to meet you, by the way.
You too, David.
Really inspirational stuff. It sounds to me as if your impulse and impetus comes from perhaps a slightly more wholesome place than mine does. I feel as though kind of a desire to. There's more of a gnashing of teeth about my sense of purpose. It's like, I'll show you, to whoever who may be. You seem as though you walk with a sense of as if you're almost bearing witness in some way, as if you're in pursuit of something.
I think that's very observant, because as a travel writer, you're. It's not about you. It never is. Sometimes it is about you, but it's more about you're the witness, and your job is to record, and so people get a sense of place and a sense of time, and how, and a sense of character. Who's there? What were the people like? What and how, and to tell people how that person was. What did he look like? What did she? How did she sound? Was there something peculiar? What were her sort of her traits and characters? Was there a special gait? And then that way you get a sense of character about someone, and then suddenly you're in there with me. And I always think, I also say, it's like every man go with me, for I shall be thy guide. And that's how I view it at times. And it is important to always remember that it's not it's about who you meet. It's about the story of others. And
sorry, David, you're saying something interesting here before we let Harry go. Is that your writing is more personal? That it's to, when you say to show somebody, to show that you're a better writer, or that you can create better characters, or than your competitors in the world?
You know what? In my case, it's very much some sort of avatar of oppression, avatar of whatever it is that I felt was inadequate, insufficient. I kind of personified that as a young person and thought, I will, I will ram my epic success down your gullet and make you choke upon it. Is not necessarily a healthy way to live, but it was very much a driving force. So I find it. You know what? One question as a writer to another is, I'm very fortunate as a novelist that I can write a chapter from another head. It's perhaps a head of somebody who's horribly unpleasant. And how, when you're choosing to write, how the tone of voice for how you're going to write a certain scene, do you try and get yourself back into the headspace you were occupying?
I think two things I'm going to say is that I think the lot of a novelist is far harder than the lot of a non-fiction writer, because you've got to really work and craft and make that into some form of literary reality. And so therefore it has to be based on something that you've got experience of. But characterization, which I think is where you come from, is inherent in any writer, because you might want, so in my Greek book, I traveled a lot. My partner kept coming out, and he was called the Spaniard, and he remained as such. But the Spaniard was a chap who asked all the questions, but I didn't have the guts to ask. So all the stupid questions the Spaniard asked, and so I made him become that, which was not. It wasn't. I mean, he's a lovely chap, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't. It wasn't. It was because I didn't want to make me look too thick, and so he always. But he was capable of asking those questions anyway. And then he would sort of say, "It's a long way. Where's the next food stop or whatever?" So I sometimes I manipulate people, and also if you come across someone and they're prominent, and you want to write about them but don't want to reveal who they are often either change location, turn it upside down, make a man into a woman. But as long as it's in the spirit of what happened, then I think that's acceptable. And I think you've got to show respect. I'm always a great believer that my writing is never going to upset. Well, it might upset one or two people, but it's not. I don't set out to do that. I set to.
You set out to upset, do you, David?
If people get upset, that's
fine.
You know what? Well, I never set out to upset. Occasionally people see themselves in my books. I more often than I actually realize that was my intention. I mean, people see themselves in my books and I can't remember who they are. So that's rather interesting.
Well, can I just add to that also? When you talk about because the sort of fantasy element of it is going back to what I talked about when you're writing. It is the possibility, and as much I enjoy sometimes throwing around words to see how you can make something different, and also when you've been using one word too many and you've got to think of something else. I mean, I have on occasion resorted to French, and I forget there's some Greek island, lawn, and I've been using that. I haven't got any more words for lawn, and the thesaurus are right on the opposite. So I said the tended pelouse. I thought that was really marvelous. He said tended pelouse, French for lawn, as you know, Humphrey. So, and it sort of kind of worked in a way. Well, I mean, no.
That's thank you, Harry. Thank you so much for that. We're now going to find out a little bit more about David Mark, who many of you will know anyway. Harry, stay with us if you've got time, because I want to bring everybody in at the end for a final thought about whether we've actually discovered anything at all about purpose that's new. But David, you began as a journalist and a crime journalist. You did the courts and all the rest of it. Did you do that for the money or for the purpose or for the, I mean, why did you start on that profession?
Well, I mean, largely because I was still too young to be a novelist, and it was the only. There's very few jobs for people who are good at talking to people, tenacious, and good with words. I mean, if you tell your careers advisor, I want to be a novelist, it's largely a case of, well, that'll be a lovely hobby. And I seem to be the only person, other than my nana, as a teenager, who thought it was more than a pipe dream. As far as I was concerned, being a novelist was really the only acceptable future for me.
So this was very unlike Rosie, for example, and I think Harry to a certain extent. You from day one,
yeah.
Wanted to be a novelist, and yet, if I could just ask you to expand on something you said there, you said you were too young, but I think Somerset Maugham published his first book at 19. So when
yeah, you know what though, the biggest difference between the books that I was writing when I was a younger man and the books that finally got published, where my priority lay, at 17 to 20, mid-20s, I was trying to show how clever I was, how insightful I was, and also I was quite an unhappy chap. So a lot of it came through this rather malevolent filter. The difference between continued failure and some degree of success came when I stopped trying to do that, and started trying to write a book that would make somebody miss their stop on the train. That I changed.
It became about the reader and not about you.
Exactly. And now it's quite strange because I really have divorced myself from my work now in a way that I don't mind if nobody can remember my name, as long as they remember about the characters I've written about and the stories I've told. And at the start, it was very much a case of this is a device to get you to know about me.
Okay, so James Bond becomes more famous than Ian Fleming.
Yes, exactly. And there's nothing would make me happier than for my characters to vastly outlive me.
If we take back and follow some of the themes that have come out during the show, the element of you wanting to be a novelist from a very young age and being told you could never make it, what did that motivate you, demotivate you? What happened there?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I never really had any idea of my own limitations as a youngster. I mean, I grew up on an estate, but my childhood was all about music and art and Agatha Christie and Enid Blyton, and I look back at my youth and it was massively different to those of my peers. So when people were like, well, what do you want to do that for? Or yeah, keep dreaming. That was just further proof to me that I was different. Because if you're the kid who gets told that they're different or weird or peculiar every day, you either try and fit in like everybody else, or you accept, well, and all right. And I, unfortunately, for a long time, I just saw everybody in the same way, which was
as an enemy.
Yeah, completely. Not in not with any real sense of malign intent, but
nobody you could trust.
Just nobody who, certainly not my cheerleaders, not my not the people who really wanted me to achieve these things. There was just it felt like a sea of naysayers, and the idea of proving people right, that people from like my background, who didn't know anybody in publishing, who didn't have a friend at Pony Club, nothing like that. The idea of sort of being that, what I laughingly thought of at the time as a working class hero, was so so enmeshed and so intrinsic to my being that they could have said endlessly, "You'll never make it," and it would have just have been white noise.
So that gives us sort of another theme that we have touched on, but I haven't sort of listed it. You had your purpose, which is you want to be a novelist, but also you had this catalyst here that gave you the motivation
Yeah.
to do that. And I've forgotten to remind is that David is setting a sort of a mini creative writing thing at the moment. So for any of you that are interested or part of his writing classes, pen a few words whilst we're talking about what you've thought of this show, what you've got from it. Put it in the chat or send it privately to David, because he will look at it and send you a response back, because we're having a mini creative writing course here. But we've got so you've got you're there and you become a journalist there, which was not your main purpose. That was a stepping stone.
Yeah.
But you become a crime reporter, so you see a particular side of life.
Yes.
You don't become a fashion reporter. So tell us about that.
Well, I mean, really, and if you're going to be a journalist, it's either crime or politics. When all said and done, is where you're going to find things that make your gums bleed a little bit. You know, things that just feel so important and powerful and weighty. And the absurdity of becoming a journalist at 17 is I only felt relatively recently. I mean, at the time, that seemed perfectly normal to me. But looking back, 17, I don't think you should be allowed the controls to the telly, really. But at the time, it just felt like that was a normal thing to do. And then suddenly you're knocking on the doors of people who somebody's just died, and you're trying to gain their trust and trying to build a reputation that you are somebody that can be trusted, and you're asking personal questions, and you're invited into that inner sanctum of feelings that are so raw, that if I didn't turn that into some approximation of it through fiction, I think I'd have gone slightly mad.
So writing about it helped you process that
completely, and also it allowed me to write the kind of books that I felt were missing. In the you don't get to scream and cut away in life, and if people are going to spend their spare time sitting reading about murder and grief and investigation and the knock-on effects of that, then the idea of it being sanitized for their entertainment felt rather repulsive to me when I was sat with people whose grief was so real. So it was a way that I could, you sort of bear witness to that in a way that was in some way authentic and gave it a sense of like an afterlife.
And all the time that you were going and hearing and talking to these people and absorbing this, building up, as it were, a sort of cache of this type of human condition. Were you writing novels as well, or trying?
I was, but I wasn't writing. What would become crime fiction. I was writing. I was writing about a character very like myself, experiencing these things, and it was all about how he felt, constantly about how he felt.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, although I look back and I think this was all very well written, it was also it was endless. It was exhausting for a reader. Unless you really want to go on a journey into a really dark place, it certainly wasn't going to get me in Watston's window.
Can I ask you a sort of question? Is your purpose that you thought was to write a novel, but was there also a parallel purpose about you writing about yourself and understanding yourself better?
Yeah, I had this desperate desire to, like, every page that I wrote was basically like was like a Rorschach test for me. It was, I felt as though whatever I did, I couldn't make myself understood through my thought and word and deed. So the idea was, if I can write down some approximation of this person and give it to people, maybe they'll tell me, why I am the way I am, and whether I'm just like everybody else, or whether I have got these grandiose, sociopathic idea that I'm meant to be something special. So yeah, there was a desperate desire to be understood.
And now that you and I are chatting, and we've had Harry and Rosie, do you feel different to us? Do you feel that you have to prove yourself now?
Yeah, I think I still have the working class imposter syndrome, which might be a slightly different thing.
Is that working class imposter syndrome different to Rose's aristocratic imposter syndrome? Because
you know what, there's probably a Venn diagram somewhere where we meet in the middle. But yeah, exactly. It's that I think there's always that sense that other people seem as though they.
Rose is back. I just wanted, Rosie, can you unmute? You were just away, but David talked about his working class imposter syndrome. I asked him, is it any different to your aristocratic imposter syndrome? What do you, is there a class thing in imposter syndrome?
Well, there's certainly parallels in what you're saying, in that I for all my life, I've never felt that I've particularly belonged where I seem to find myself, other than on the ice or on the sand with my teammates, if I have any. And when I was a debutante, I didn't feel like I really was, or I didn't feel like I really fitted in, that I felt I was drifting around on the outside without necessarily being actually on the outside.
Does that sound, David, to what you, your working class imposter syndrome is the same?
Completely. It seems to me
it works both ways, doesn't it? Because I had it the other way around when I went to a local sixth form grammar school to finish my A-levels.
Everybody else has like sort of a pre-existing club. I always felt as though I'd missed a class somewhere where everything was explained to everybody else, and I'd missed that because I had the flu or a clarinet lesson, and I just, I came back in and I just felt as though there was a bit of knowledge lacking in me that everybody else seemed to have.
Yes, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people in the audience today who probably suffered the same thing as a parent, whether a mother or father, when you're standing outside the school gates to collect your child, and you look at everyone else, all the other parents, and they all seem to be part of the same herd, and yet you get this sense of not belonging. They might as well be a different species to you.
Oh, that's perfectly put.
Rebecca says, I can relate to Rosie. Rebecca, do you relate to David as well? And this, I mean, he's working class male, and we've got a female explorer. I mean, is this something that we're all with? I'm beginning to feel it now, that I'm going to hand over to Rosie to run this show for me. But she'd do a much better job.
And I really would get the imposter syndrome would surface.
but we're covering it, David. I think you brought us to really interesting, because the imposter syndrome seems to be universal. A sense of purpose that you've described there through your writing, that was your purpose motivated by your goal to understand or get rid of imposter syndrome?
In my case, you know what? I felt relatively at ease with myself as a journalist. I felt like I could do that. I felt as though my mask was sufficiently convincing that it almost became genuine. As you know, the puppet you wear to work. I could have continued that in perpetuity. It was when I stepped into something that was so extraordinarily different. I think the difficulty I felt with was that the reverence I feel for people who do what I do very well bordered on deification. Like the idea that I could suddenly step from a half-decent journalist into a best-selling novelist, and be amongst the people whose work had, enriched my life.
Name those people for us, just so that we can understand, because we've probably heard of some of them.
Well, we're talking of the the Val McDermid's, Ian Rankins, the John Connolly's, from a crime perspective, but also writers, lesser known but vastly talented, like Leslie Goldster, whose prose she should be known as a du Maurier. And when you're doing something that is you're on the same bookshelves as these people now. Like my name's next to Henning Mankell, who writes Wallander, if you go into the bookshops. And I think that was the point where I hadn't realized how much the imposter syndrome had consumed me until I realized just I'd actually done it now. I'd achieved my dream. And that's when you realize that it's in you. Your sense of worth doesn't change based upon.
Do you find that actually, because maybe when you stand back and look at a bookshelf and you see your book, that's when you might think imposter syndrome. But when you're writing your book, or when you're clambering over the ice or going over the sand dunes, you absolutely know without an atom of doubt that you are in your element, that you are where you should be doing what you should.
Utterly centered. Utterly. I mean, that is my frequency. It reminds me of an old transistor radio. You find a level of clarity, of purpose, thought, imagination. Everything coalesces, and I'm doing what I was made to do.
It's almost religious, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, without doubt. I mean, to extend the imagery. I mean, I could easily be, a monk by candlelight transcribing the Gospels, and it wouldn't be a more perfect replica of me using whatever gift I was given to take it as far as it would go.
Yes.
So just
I'll take that to an extreme, and I remember sort of assuaging my husband's fears about the Arctic ice in particular, and saying, well, I think that if I were to slip off this mortal coil, we're better than where I feel that I really belong.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like you said at the start. I can't view Shackleton and Scott as either failures or tragedies. I mean, they were utterly committed to their level of self-knowledge was 100%.
And yet each one of them, like we're talking about our imposter syndrome, afflictions, whatever, each one of those heroes was a flawed character.
That's the bit that's really important for me to remember. And what I think is a little bit difficult about our current age is that we seem to expect our heroes to be saintly. And I that's why I liked writing about characters who are, who got the full gamut of human emotions and human traits. I think it's important to remember that you can be, a magnificent detective, for example, and also, have weird Tuesday evening kinks or whatever it might be.
Yes, it's got to be relatable, and interestingly, on a kind of practical level as well. I remember being so many times rather stung by going in this wretched bit of expeditions and preparations is to raise the funds, and going into big corporate sponsorship meetings and coming out thinking, oh, well, I think that went rather well because everyone's gone, wow, and gee, and what a small little thing like you and a woman doing XYZ. And past me, there would be some sort of tall, great team of men, sort of military and looking as fit as Harry. They would get the sponsorship because they look like how they should look, how an explorer should look.
Well, I'll just tell you one very silly story. But when I first when I went down to meet my publishers for the first time, having written this, bizarrely successful bestseller, I'd come down on the train and I had a bag with me, and I was invited in to go into the boardroom to wait for them, which, well, at least I thought that was happening. But somewhere along the line, they'd made the mistake and thought that I was the electrician who'd come to fix the building. So I'd been sat for half an hour in this room while they were in a different room.
They just mistake us.
Because I'd turned up looking like me with a bag. Somebody had presumed that I was a Sparky.
But no imposter syndrome then. You as an electrician, you could have done it.
You know what? I would have been quite happy to give it. I'd have felt more comfortable trying to change a plug for them than I would having a discussion about the publishing strategies. So,
David, take us through your preparation. We've done Harry's and we've done Rose's, and it's all different. Presumably, you don't have to do 100 press-ups a day and all the rest of it, but you still have got these challenges, mental and physical. of going through your day of writing.
Yeah, yes, indeed. I mean, it's never a chore. In fact, you know what? One of the nice parts of my day is when I put my book down at the end of the night and I put my head on the pillow and the lights off, and I think, well, it'll be about half an hour before I fall asleep. I'll take my brain for a walk, and like that's really when I do what I think of as my preparation, because I get to know a character and I try to understand that character, and I imagine the things that might have changed in their lives, and I try and work out when they get up in the morning, what are they excited by, what are they scared of, what shoes do they put on, um, and by the time I actually put fingers on my keys, I know them well enough that the blank space isn't there for long.
So the writer's block, that's the famous thing, but we know what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, do you suffer it? And if you do, how do you get over it?
It's a creative logjam. If it's anything, it's an inability to differentiate between the strength of ideas. You might be struggling from the fact that you've had half a dozen ideas and you don't know which is the best one to write. So pick one and write it. Is the only advice that works for me. I've no way of knowing whether, if I start it in this room or that room, or I start it with this character or that character, I don't know which reader I'll never meet 18 months from now will best respond to. So all I can do is get on with it. And having been a journalist means that you can't waft around fanning yourself with a peacock feather thinking it'll come tomorrow. You get on, you pick one and you write it.
And we've heard from two things that we heard from Harry and Rosie. I want to put to you two is that once you get into the flow of writing a book, does your mind clear into a different stage, or are you still got the dog to feed and the gas bills and all that stuff?
If you ever, if the door goes or my phone goes, I mean, I could commit murder. There's no two ways about it. If I'm in the flow of writing, what I essentially want is to live in some cool cloistered space. Unfortunately, reality doesn't permit you that. So I have to. You can't just start writing willy-nilly and steal bits of time here and there. You need to say, right, for the next 2 hours, do not disturb.
And does it have to be for the next 2 weeks or the next month in order to keep it clear, or you don't have that luxury?
Well, a book has to come when I start writing. When I put prologue on a blank page, I know that 2 months from now I'll write the end. Then I can edit with scraps of time as and when. But that virgin press of imagination has to be as pure as it can be.
And when you reach the end, or let's say when it's published and you've got your launch party, or you see the books, do you get the same deflation that we heard from Rosie and Harry there?
Oh, the sense of what the hell was all the fuss about? Yeah. Why have I invested so much in this? Yeah, absolutely. To the point that I was recently told off by my partner for the fact that I almost wouldn't allow myself to enjoy my launches anymore, because for the past dozen books or so, they've all sold about the same level. They've all been critically well received. So I've become blasé about something as significant as releasing a new novel. And if you'd gone back and told that 18-year-old me that you'll be on your 24th novel, and they'll be universally well received, and you'll be getting blasé about it and saying, what's the point? I deserve a shake for that. So
would it be fair to say that you did this, you succeeded on your 19-year-old, you're on a plateau, and that you're actually looking for a new purpose or a higher purpose? Or
I thought that the only purpose I had in life was essentially to become a novelist, and then to be a dad who didn't mess their kids up. That would be my goals in life. Completely losing sight of, well, what happens when you become a novelist? and you've got another 50 years of life perhaps ahead of you. I hadn't really considered that. So I'm now in the stage where I've recently permitted myself to feel sense of joie de vivre about things that are an approximation of that. So my sense of purpose now is equally, I want other people to experience the joy of writing. I want other people to understand how to put their imagination onto the page. So, and I get just as excited by other people's ideas as I do about my own. So it's almost as if I've allowed myself this new idea that it's good, it's great to be
to share your, in a way, that's what Rosie was saying, is that asked whether she would still be going to the North Pole when she's 90. She said no, but she'll be teaching others how to do that sort of things. We've reached a stage where we're coming to the end, so I'm going to open. We've got questions coming in. If anybody wants to ask any of the panelists, they're not panelists, they're guests on a lazy Sunday afternoon, any questions, or we'll try and fit them in. I'm going to throw a curveball out there that anybody, any of the three guests can answer. From Suri, what was Hemingway's shortest story covering the beginning, the middle, and the end? Anybody know? No, somebody can Google it.
One Man on the Sea?
Three Men?
Clean, well-lighted place.
David, you're the expert.
I
Man on the Sea. One about the shark, eh?
I thought it was a clean, well-lighted place, but I could be entirely wrong.
Okay, if anybody can Google that and let us know. I'm going to go down the questions. Emma, wonderful Emma. I write from an egoistic point of view. I feel I owe that. This is quite what you were saying here, David. I feel I owe to explain to my family, children, and my future generations, and can only write a memoir. I do not feel that I have anything special to share with the rest of the world. That imposter syndrome killed off any writing dreams I have. Thoughts, anybody? A purpose dream being pulled off?
Yeah, I think maybe look to, not that I've read it, but A Diary of an Edwardian Lady. You can write anything about your day, no matter how ordinary it might seem to be at that time, but fill it with emotion as well as some detail, because it will become a record of social history, which will gather value in time to come. And in, for instance, my logbooks from expeditions, and I bet you, Harry, you're the same as when you have an uneventful day on your walks. Not the same in David's books, but I still find it's a treasure trove when I go back to those days in my logbook, because if there's one thing that you can't reconjure up, it is emotions and memories as much as
yes. So put them down now.
It is the case. It is about the telling of the story, and it doesn't matter whether it's fiction or non-fiction. In that sense, it is how you present it and how you distill your life down to the component parts that you think are important. That is how they will gauge how the story will be told.
So make sure you put it down. So Emma, don't keep writing it down, and then at some stage you will hone it into something quite brilliant, because many of us here have heard your stories, and I think they're absolutely stunningly interesting about your life in Zimbabwe and that. Alicia, I think I feel the same as you, Rebecca. Never felt I fitted in. So do we all feel like that? I am the host. I can't reveal my things, but we've got Harry, Rosie, and David, and Rebecca all feeling like that.
If we've all got a flaw or two, I can't talk to you about my Tuesday night flaw, David, but I've certainly got a few Wednesday and Thursday night flaws. I mean, that must mean, if we've got a few flaws in us, that must mean we're not so imposters as we might think we are.
Yes. I mean, once you end up next to Henry Mankell or Charles Dickens, they must have been suffering from the same imposter syndrome when they were first published.
Indeed, and it's very strange. I mean,
you know, Alexandra Shulman, editor of Vogue, she had imposter syndrome.
Unless your character was Jumbo Jet, or you're flying the USS Enterprise. Otherwise anybody else can be but unless you're actually doing that job where if you're not doing it correctly, then everybody's going to crash. Then surely we're all imposters in a way. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, Rosie, you must find that even sometimes when you're on a journey, or David, when you get a commission, you think, I can't believe I'm doing this. And that's half the thing. You think, God, yeah, thank you, pinch yourself, because there you are, you're doing it. And
Getting away with it.
no, getting away with it. This is my commute today, and you think, golly, I'm the luckiest man in the world, or the luckiest
Yeah,
woman.
I mean, I don't know about you two, but I feel I'm very grateful for this peculiar gift that I was given, an ability to write. And I almost feel as though I'm duty bound to take it as far as it'll go. And there's nothing that irritates me more than seeing somebody with what seems like a gift, who is pursuing something that's counter to that gift, whether through circumstances or just bloody mindedness. I can't. It seems absurd to me.
Yes, I agree, but I also think that we are obliged to seek out what our gifts might be. They might not be so totally obvious, and it might take a while to surface.
People say to me, "You're not going to do another book, are you?" Because, and you say, "Yes, of course I am, because it's what I do."
Yeah. Who are these people? They sound dreadful people. Don't listen to them.
And you say, well, why wouldn't I? Because it's fun, it's enjoyable. As I say, I've never done anything. Well, I have done a few things I didn't enjoy particularly, but you stop doing them quite quickly. How you water finds their level.
Rebecca makes a point here, which is, I think even prime ministers and presidents have imposter syndrome behind the scenes. PMs flag their way. I bet you Donald Trump has it big time.
I don't think he does.
I think perhaps not.
No,
but of course, he thinks he has divine right.
Yeah, I think that we are now living through the age that we will look back on future generations will look back on now the way we look at the Tudors.
Yes.
These are people who feel ordained by if not God.
I wish they didn't.
Yeah.
There's a question from Rita here, and then I want to bring us back to sum up the purpose thing. Do any of you writers ever struggle to actually finding the words and sentence that adequately reflect your thoughts?
Yes, and one thing I always find is that somewhere there was a lovely chap called he wrote a book called McCarthy's Bar, and he was a great journalist and writer. I forget his name, and he said, is it Pete McCarthy? That's right. And he said, if you write down words fail me, then you're not doing your job as an author or a journalist. And words fail me. It's that when I see that, it makes my blood boil, because you're meant to say you cannot describe the view in front of you. Yes, you can. Get down and write it. And that always makes me think, words cannot describe it. No, you little idle thing. And you say, and it should be, it's your job. So you need to turn it and turn it and turn it, I find, until you come up with something that is adequate for what you do. And in a way, when I got to Rome, I was quite pleased I didn't get to meet the Pope, because how would you adequately describe that? That not words would fail me, but you might never do it justice if you had a holy moment with him. Excuse me.
We've got
that's my Tuesday night flaw.
This has been a fabulously inspiring session, which it certainly has for me. So we've got a few minutes left. I want to go around each of you in the order that you came up and just sum up what you've learned. And give us the sort of definition of one line about purpose, if you had to do it. And for all our audience, David Mark is waiting for your descriptions. Rebecca, I think, has said this has been a wonderfully inspiring session. That is her creative writing on it. Let's have some more to send to David Mark. Rosie, purpose.
Well, my conclusion is that listening to both of you, all of you, it strikes me how powerful a sense of purpose is. I know I talked about it, but it really strikes me listening to both your stories, and that actually each one of us, and maybe all of us, are on the equivalent of a life pilgrimage, because although sometimes I feel slightly uncomfortable calling myself an explorer, and I said why, because it's sort of, do they still exist? But I also don't like to be confused with an adventurer. And Harry, I think you pointed out early on in your conversation that you weren't an adventurer. And the difference here is important because, and for David as well, what we do with passion and with purpose. And it is our obligation, unlike adventurers who tend to tick boxes. Okay, nothing wrong with it. You're having fun and maybe you're raising funds for charity at the same time, which is brilliant. But as explorers of life, say, we are forging a very valuable legacy through our writing or through our talking or through sharing our experiences, perhaps in rarefied situations, so that other people can benefit like we have from those who have gone before us, and me from Liv, for instance. We can help other people.
That's,
And that's our
that
legacy.
is lovely. And tell me, do you, or did you have, before coming onto this show, imposter syndrome, Rosie?
Completely. Did I get away with it?
I didn't have imposter syndrome until I came onto this program, and I've got David in my right corner, who's a seriously successful author, and I just shine out the odd book from time to time. And I've got Rosie, who's a real explorer here, and then there's me, this old bum who just who sort of bumbles through life and causes trouble everywhere he goes, and then every now and again writes about his adventures. But I think the key thing about the imposter syndrome is, and I'm fascinated, we all have it, because I thought it was only me actually, and is that if as a traveler, if I was writing my journeys up from a point of view, say Bear Grylls or Ralph Fiennes, it would be a different book. And I think also that you need a sense of journey. So if I said, yeah, and I was going to climb the next mountain and do this in 2 days and I ate my candlemin cake, it's not quite the same as I slugged up that bloody mountain. Christ, I thought I was going to die on the way up. And how did I go that? Because I plugged in Donna Summer, and I biscuit all the way up to the top. This is how it went, and that's how it is. And I think you need that sense of, so you want to make it. When I write, I tell a story. I want it to be achievable, that everyone doesn't think, crikey, Harry is Superman. One thing I'm sure he certainly isn't. And by the way, if I look like some sort of Superman, that's because the shirt's too tight. You don't get paid enough as a writer. So anyway, but
Harry, just to give us one sentence, only one, to sum up your idea of purpose.
I think it is, you have a dream, and from the dream you get a vision. Once you have that vision, that is the way forward, and you connect from the dream to the vision. That's how you make things happen.
Dream to a vision. David, sum up for us purpose.
You get one life, you may as well do the thing that matters to you the most. And unless it causes too much kerfuffle, damn the consequences. So
just and all of three of you, just a yes or no, do you still feel that you're different to everybody else or not?
Oh yeah.
Depends who you are.
Donald Trump.
So we're not going to end on that note. David, give us a final thought.
Yes, I am, but I not everybody else. I believe that we move through concentric circles until we find more people who are similar to us, and I'm very lucky to be in the creative industries where I am, surrounded on all sides by bookish, sensitive, confused people, and it's quite pleasing to realize that there's more people like me than I thought.
And I'm surrounded by nutters, and I feel at home.
I always think that people never see me as a writer. So when you're going to some talk at some book festival or whatever, and I always makes me laugh that people are coming. Actually, anybody's coming to see me at all. It always amazes me, and I forget that. So I'm just on the train picking my nose on the way there normally, and suddenly I realize half the audience is sat in the carriage watching me do that at the same time. It's rather embarrassing. So
on that hilarious and embarrassing note, Time's winged chariot is at Goldster's case. Thank you so much, our wonderful audience, for being here. And thank you, Rosie, Harry, and David, for giving us, actually, we ended up with, for me, quite a deep understanding of why we all do what we do and where it's taking us. On Tuesday at 1 p.m, I am with Professor Alf Collins, a maestro of health, well-being, and the National Health Service, Come join me then. Let's give Alf a Goldster conversation he'll never forget, a bit like the one that Rosie, Harry, and David has given us today. Until then, stay curious, be generous, stay active, be social, be Goldster, and of course, be purposeful. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. There we go.
What a lovely show.